Good evening. This evening we're pleased to once again welcome Dr. Stanley Montieth to the Granada Forum. He is a retired orthopedic surgeon, a researcher, a historian, an author, lecturer, and talk show host. Dr. Montieth has educated audiences both nationally and internationally on a wide variety of subjects and is particularly knowledgeable about teacher, author Carroll Quigley, having researched his life and times almost 30 years. Significantly, Professor Quigley was both instructor and mentor to a young, impressionable Bill Clinton, influencing him while he attended Georgetown University in the mid-1960s. Not surprisingly then, in accepting the Democratic nomination for the presidency in 1992, Clinton publicly acknowledged Quigley. Why are the professor's work and influence important? In his books, Tragedy and Hope and the Anglo-American Establishment, he speaks about a secret society comprised of the world's financial elite and their plan to create a worldwide feudalistic system under their control. Today, they allegedly dominate both major political parties in America, making a mockery of the democratic process. This evening, Dr. Montieth will speak to those subjects and share some shocking revelations and elaborate on why recognition of the hidden forces behind the Anglo-American secret society is essential if America hopes to survive as a free nation. Now please join me in a nice warm welcome for Dr. Stanley Montieth.
Well, good evening. Thank you. It's awfully good to be here with you again. And tonight I'm going to tell you an amazing story that is probably quite poorly understood. In fact, much of what we're going to tell you tonight we really haven't gone into before. It's been said that an understanding of the forces which have shaped the events of the 20th century is predicated not upon facts to be learned, but upon secrets to be discovered. Let me repeat that. An understanding of the forces which have shaped the events of the 20th century is predicated not on facts to be learned, but upon secrets to be discovered. And how do you really understand what indeed has happened during this 20th century as we see our nation going from crisis to crisis? We see wars and revolutions and disease throughout the world. We see a gradually lowering of American living standards. We see successive administrations, whether they be Republican or Democrat, who refuse to build any sort of a defense for America against nuclear attack. We knew that we've got the Republicans into office, everything was going to be fine. We'd get a balanced budget, we'd cut back on big government, and what have we done? Why, we've actually increased spending for next year and the year after that. In fact, many times the Republicans have been giving more money than the Democratic administration had asked for. And something's seriously wrong. Well, let me try to explain what it is. And as a preface, I'd like to tell you 3 poems, because these poems have to do with the shaping of our destiny. The first one was written in 1848 by Alfred Lord Tennyson, a British author, one of the greatest authors. He wrote The Charge of the Light Brigade. But he was also part of this belief in the British Empire, this idea that mankind could create a perfect world under Anglo-Saxon domination. The title of the poem is Locksley Hall. And this is what Lord Tennyson wrote. For I dipped into the future, far as any eye could see, saw a vision of the world and all the wonders that would be. Heard the heavens filled with shouting, and there rained a ghastly dew of the nation's airy navies grappling in the central blue, till the war drums throbbed no longer, and the battlefields were furled in the Parliament of Man, the Federation of the world. Then the common sense of most will keep the awe in fretful awe, and the kindly earth shall slumber, lapped in universal law. It was a wonderful dream. This idea of a world government under the benevolent rule of world rule to world law. In October of 1993, Arthur Schlesinger Jr. wrote an article that appeared in the Wall Street Journal. And this is what he said: "The world of law will not be attained by exhortation. Law requires enforcement. Let's not kid ourselves that we can have a new world order without paying for it in blood as well as in money. Maybe the cost of enforcement will be too great. National interest, narrowly construed, maybe will be a safer rule. But let us recognize that we are surrendering a noble dream. Remember those lines of Tennyson that Churchill called the most wonderful of modern prophecies, and that Harry Truman carried in his wallet throughout his life. And then he quotes this poem that I've just given you. Now, why would Winston Churchill say that that was such a wonderful poem? I mean, wasn't Churchill dedicated to the British Empire? And Harry Truman, why, give him hell, Harry, why did he carry those words in his wallet all of his life? And then you look back to the time of Harry Truman's presidency when the United Nations Charter was written and confirmed. And then, of course, we offered the Marshall Plan to Europe because Europe was in danger of going communism, and then we offered the Marshall Plan to the communists. And that didn't quite make sense. And then, of course, China went communist and Eastern Europe went communist, and then we went into the no-win war in Korea, all under Harry S. Truman, who carried the words to this poem in his wallet all of his life. The second poem I encountered when I went to live in Africa. And in the mid-1970s, I took my family, moved to South Africa, where I taught at a major university. And I was searching at that time, because I'd already heard of Carroll Quigley, I'd read his book, and I knew that South Africa had something to do with this move towards world government. And so it was that driving along the west coast of southern Africa, there I saw on a hillside this great monument. I didn't know what it was, but I was intrigued by it. I mean, what was this great granite monument doing there with the pillars almost looked like a small replica of the Lincoln Memorial? And so I climbed the long stairway past tier after tier of granite lions that were guarding the entrance to this almost shrine. And there within the portico, you see this great statue, the bust of a man and a pedestal beneath it. And inscribed on that pedestal were these words: "The intense and brooding spirit still shall quicken and control. Living, he was the land, and dead, his soul shall be her soul." Those words were penned by Rudyard Kipling to honor the man who adopted the vision that was put forward in Tennyson's poem. A man who was intent upon bringing world government under Anglo-Saxon domination. His name was Cecil John Rhodes. The intense and brooding spirit still shall quicken and control. To quicken is to come back to life. Living, he was the land, and dead, his soul shall be her soul. And let me tell you that there have been many men who wanted to rule the world. I mean, certainly Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great. They say he died because he had no more worlds to conquer. Adolf Hitler, Rousseau. But no one has had more influence on the world than Cecil John Rhodes. And the tragedy is that most people don't understand that almost everything that's going on in the world today has to do with that man. The third poem was written by James Russell Lowell. It was also written in 1848. And it really summarizes the essence of the battle in which we're involved. James Russell Lowell was writing about the crisis of slavery as it faced America and the moral wrong that was going on, and the eternal battle that has always existed between good and evil. And this is what James Russell Lowell said: "Once to every man and nation comes the moment to decide. In that strife of truth with falsehood for the good or evil side, then it is the brave man chooses while the coward stands aside, until the multitudes make virtue of the faith they have denied. Though the cause of evil prospers, yet his truth alone is strong. Though her portion be the scaffold, and upon the throne be wrong. But that scaffold sways the future, for in the dim unknown standeth God within the shadows, keeping watch above his own." And he was talking about a strife of truth with falsehood. Well, I briefly wanted to mention one of my favorite murder mysteries. And you may wonder what this has to do with the story we're telling you tonight, but it's a story written by Agatha Christie. It's called Murder on the Orient Express, and it's the story of this train line that runs from Istanbul to Paris, and it brings the mystery of the East to the rationalism of the West. And during the early part of the century, this work of fiction tells of this train, and of course there are a number of Americans on it, and there is a Monsieur Poirot, who is a Belgian police officer. He's a Belgian detective. He's the hero of many Agatha Christie murder mysteries, murder stories. And there's a very disreputable American on this train who tells Monsieur Poirot that somebody's trying to kill him. And he wants Monsieur Poirot to protect his life, and he'll give him $5,000. He'll give him $10,000. He's worried about his life. And Monsieur Poirot says, no, I'm not interested. And that night, that very night, this man is murdered. And he's stabbed to death. And there's a question of who did it. And of course, Monsieur Poirot is recruited by the member of the board that controls the railway to find out who the murderer is. And they happen to be trapped in the snowdrift somewhere in the great mountains along the route of the Orient Express. And Monsieur Poirot says, there are too many clues. There are too many clues. And as we look at the world today, and we see this move towards the New World Order, we sometimes face exactly the same issue. There are just too many clues out there. In fact, we talk to people about what's really behind everything that's going on. And some people will tell you it's the bankers. It's the bankers because when we have wars, bankers make money. And if you read Professor Quigley's book, Tragedy and Hope, on page 324, he'll tell you how the central bankers are working in concert to create a feudalistic system by which they'll control the nations of the world by financial flow, and they're doing it secretly, and the banks are working all together. And people will tell you it's the bankers, and other people say, oh, it's not the bankers, it's the Jewish bankers. It's the Jewish bankers, and they will tell you that the Federal Reserve has two types of stock, Class A and Class B, and all this money is going overseas, but there's no evidence of any of that. And the tragedy is, if you look at the central bankers of the world, most of them are not Jewish, and that's what Professor Quigley says in his book. The vast majority of the central bankers are not Jewish at all. Well, there are other people who are going to say, well, you don't understand. It's really the Council on Foreign Relations. Because since 1953, every chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, the head of the central bank in America, has come from the Council on Foreign Relations. Do you realize that every head of the Arms and Disarmament Agency in the United States since 1953 has come from the CFR. All but one Secretary of State, all but one Assistant Secretary of State, all but one Director of the CIA since 1953 has come from the Council on Foreign Relations. And furthermore, 7 of the last 9 presidents came from the Council on Foreign Relations. The Council on Foreign Relations is America's invisible government that's running the world. And people say, no. Council on Foreign Relations just is for America. It's the Bilderbergers, because the Bilderbergers combines the people of great wealth in America and the socialists in America, and they work with the Europeans, and they meet on a regular basis, and they pick our presidents, and Bill Clinton was picked by the Bilderberger group, and people said, no. It's the Trilateral Commission, because that includes the people from the Orient and from Japan and from the Pacific Rim, and this is an international movement towards world control. And others are going to say, you don't understand, it's really communism. Communism is the real enemy. Most people think that communism is dead. Communism isn't dead. The whole fall of communism was a sham. In fact, Gorbachev had actually created the Green Cross Foundation in the United States, taken the papers out for it 6 months before the phony revolution over there. Communism is in full military production for war. Don't you know that? You hear how the soldiers are starving, but they're building new nuclear weapons and new mobile intercontinental missiles, and America's unilaterally disarming, and that doesn't make any sense. And China's in full production for war, and there are 1.25 billion people who live under communism in China, and our government is doing everything they can to help them. And most favored nation treaty status, but it's not just that. Do you realize that 2/3 of all the new industries going in there are financed by American corporations and American international banks? Communism's the enemy. And others will say, oh, it's not communism at all, it's socialism, because every communist is a socialist, and there's a Socialist International out there, second, third most powerful organization in the world, and it has regular meetings, and the socialists throughout the world meet, and they work in conjunction with the communists to further their goals. And they say, oh, no, it isn't. That is the humanist, because every communist and Every socialist is a humanist. And if you haven't read the Humanist Manifesto, they've laid the whole plan out for world domination, and they're socialists, and they want world government, and they're pro-abortion and pro-homosexual and pro-criminal and pro-drug, and it's the humanists. And then there's people who say, oh no, it's the foundations. The great foundations of America, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, they're funding everything that's gone on in our society. They've been doing it for the last 100 years, and they're intent upon world government and socialism. And others will say, oh no, it's the Illuminati. It's the Illuminati. In fact, haven't you ever looked on the back of a dollar bill? You look on the back of that dollar bill, and what do you see there? You see the pyramid with the all-seeing eye over the top of that, and that's the symbol of the Illuminati. You see that? The number down underneath it says 1776, and that was the date that the Illuminati was founded. But the problem with that is that the Great Seal of the United States, from which this occult emblem came, and it isn't a cult emblem, and that's not the eye of the god that we worship. That's the sun god. If you read occultist, that's the eye of Horus. That is indeed the eye of Lucifer that's on the back of the dollar bill. But this design, at least the great eye, was actually suggested in 1790, just 4 years after the Illuminati was founded, and it didn't have its tentacles into America at that time. This was actually put on the back of the Great Seal of the United States in 1782, just 6 years after the Illuminati was founded. And the 1776, from the very inception, when they were designing the Great Seal, had to do with the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The Illuminati was a very powerful force in Europe and infiltrated the Masonic lodges and played a part in the French Revolution. Others will say it's not the Illuminati, it's the Lucis Trust. If you've never heard of the Lucis Trust, it used to be called the Lucifer Trust. And this whole thing is Luciferian, and the Lucis Trust used to be right in the United Nations Plaza, and it's working today. And you'll find people like Robert Mueller and Theodore Hirschberg, formerly at Notre Dame, and many of our key and most important people in America are tied into the Lucis Trust, which used to be the Lucifer Trust, and it's all Luciferian. And others are going to say, no, you don't understand. It's the Masons. Do you realize that 14 American presidents have been Masons? Do you realize that people wonder why they took God out of our schools and God out of our public exhibits, why we can't have four of the Supreme Court judges, of the 6 Supreme Court judges who voted to do that, were Masons, and the Masons have always supported separation of church and state in this wall of church and state because they worship a different God. And this indeed is a Masonic symbol. It isn't an Illuminati symbol. This is the Masons. And others are going to say, well, it isn't really the Masons, it's the New Age. The New Age has infiltrated every aspect of our life today. It's every place. If you haven't read the book, The Aquarian Conspiracy, you can get it, written by Marilyn Ferguson. And, if you look on the front of that, the symbol of theirs almost looks like 3 sixes intertwined. The New Age movement is certainly one of the most powerful movements in the world today. And then there's others who say, oh no, it's the oligarchy, it's the ruling houses of Europe. These are the royal blood that's been there for years, working behind the scenes, because one of them eventually will become the king of Jerusalem, who will be the Antichrist. And then there's the story of the Priory of Sion, which was supposedly a secret society that's been written about in a book called Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and they claim that this secret society goes back to the bloodline of the union of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene, and of course this is totally blasphemous, but there are really people who believe that the Priory, the Sion, and their Moravian kings and Moravian lines go into the Habsburgs and into Prince Carlos of Spain, King Carlos of Spain. And then, of course, there are others who really believe that we're dealing with the Rosicrucians. The Rosicrucians come out of the mystery religions. It's a powerful secret society. It has branches right over in San Jose, in California, in the East, all throughout America. There are others who tell you it's the Skull and Bones Society. After all, George Bush came from there. William Buckley came from there. Ties into the Central Intelligence Agency, secret society out of Yale. Other people, of course, will tell you it's Theosophy. Madame Blavatsky's secret society. Has their headquarters up here at Ojai, back at Wheaton, Illinois. It has tentacles into every aspect of our society. There are others who tell you it's really the UFOs and those foreign little critters who are here beaming ideas down into our minds. And I'm reminded then of what Monsieur Perot, as did is he analyzed what was happening on the Orient Express. And of course, now they're trapped in a snowdrift, and he's talked to all of the various suspects, and every single one of them had a motive for killing this American. And of course, he is totally puzzled. There are too many clues. Everybody there has a motive. Well, as we look at what's going on in the world today, we are told, well, you know, if we could just control abortion, if you are a moral individual and you will spend your efforts to do something about the murder of the unborn throughout, not only in America, but throughout the world, this is the real problem, abortion. Or the real problem is homosexuality, and which manifests the breakdown in our society, or it's crime, or it's drugs, or it's education, or environment, or evolution, or all of these things are real, and they're real problems. Population control, immigration. But you see, these are all issues that are being put forth so that we will be on the defensive. And as long as we are on the defensive, we are going to continue losing this battle. And so let me take you into something I know something about, and perhaps we can, by analyzing Professor Carroll Quigley and his writings, we can begin to understand what this whole incredible move towards world government is really all about. I got started this battle back in 1962. Cuba had just gone communist. Fidel Castro had been in America after the revolution. He'd been lauded. He'd spoken to Congress. He had hugged Richard Nixon. He was going back from America to Cuba to fight communism. And then suddenly, he was a communist, and something was wrong about that. I wasn't very smart at the time. I was just out of my orthopedic training. I was a busy young orthopedist in a community. Now has about 10 orthopedists. I think there were 2 of us there at the time. And we were just working day and night. But I began to be fascinated by what was happening. I began reading. And first of all, I learned about communism and the fact that the communists controlled almost a third of the people and a third of the landmass of the world. And this was rather scary because you see country after country after country going communist, and Eastern Europe had gone communist after the Second World War, and China had gone communist. And how did it